When we think about memory, we often imagine it as a mental filing cabinet, a place where past experiences and knowledge are stored, waiting to be retrieved. But memory isn't monolithic. There's a crucial difference between remembering facts, like the capital of France, and remembering experiences, like walking through the Paris street while recollecting its sensory details. The former refers to semantic memory. This is our knowledge about the world. It is more structural, impersonal, and mostly decontextualized, like a mental map made from many individual experiences. The second is episodic memory. This type is more specific, personal, and necessarily bound to a certain time and place. It is special in that it is accompanied by a distinct form of consciousness, namely automatic awareness, the capacity to vividly re-experience a moment as if you were reliving it yourself. This is different from the noetic awareness that accompanies semantic memory, where we simply know something without having to relive it. Episodic remembering, however, is not equivalent to replaying. It might feel like we're opening a mental archive, scanning files or stepping into some orderly memory library. But this is an illusion. Instead of being a fixed archive, our memory is malleable, checked by relevance, context, and meaning. The brain does not recall things with perfect fidelity, not because its neurons are error-prone, but because the brain prioritizes remembering important relationships in the world, independent of the details. We only store information if we believe it may be relevant in the future, if we can associate it with something, or if it has an emotional valence. A recalled episodic memory is thus accompanied by all semantic features that were active when it was originally formed. That is, all the meanings, associations, and conceptual categories your brain connected to that experience at the time. So when you remember a night spent outdoors, what is recalled isn't just the spatial layout or the visual scene. It also brings back the overarching associated concepts, the idea of a cool summer night, the concept of close connection, and the emotions woven into that moment. Moreover, the process we imagine as retrieval is inherently tied to reconstruction. So rather than a precise retrieval from storage, memory acts like a generative association system, blending past traces with present context to produce something coherent, but not identical. Any remembered event is reassembled from distributed cortical representations, which are, in turn, shaped by the context and relevance of the present moment. This automatically renders our software inseparable from our hardware. The process not only reshapes local functional connections between neurons through the strengthening and weakening of synapses, but subtly alters the very structure of information processing itself. Thus, every bit of prior knowledge automatically influences the acquisition and interpretation of new knowledge, and the more sophisticated our encoded knowledge is, the more sophisticated our perception of the world becomes. At the center of the episodic recall system lies a dialogue between two major brain regions, the hippocampus and the neocortex. The neocortex is the largest and most functionally diverse area of the brain. Sensory, spatial, and emotional information is processed and stored here in a distributed manner, across interconnected regions specialized for different types of content. The hippocampus is a structure nested deep within the temporal lobe and acts as a memory index. It doesn't store all the content. Instead, it binds these distributed cortical traces, the what, where, and when, into one coherent episode. When you experience something new, the neocortical sensory input connections flow forward to the hippocampus, which receives not only information about objects from the temporal lobe, but also about the spatial layout information that arrives via the parietal and ventral visual scene areas, as well as the subjective emotional and reward-related signals from the prefrontal areas. All of these inputs converge through structures like the parahippocampal gyrus and the entorhinal cortex into the CA3 of the hippocampus. The CA3 acts as an auto-association network, meaning it can bind together any arbitrary set of co-occurring features into one unified, retrievable memory, whether it's people, places, or feelings. Any combination of neurons that fire together can be rapidly linked. At first, these activations might seem scattered, like noise. Thanks to its dense web of recurrent connections, the system begins to self-organize. With each loop of internal feedback and rapid synaptic strengthening, unstable patterns collapse into one stable configuration. This is an attractor state. It's the brain's way of compressing a fleeting experience into one lasting snapshot, clear, unified, and ready to be recalled. So how is a memory recalled later? It often starts with a partial cue, something that reactivates the pattern stored in the CA3. The CA3 attractor network uses pattern completion to fill in the rest. From CA3, the signal flows through CA1 back through the entorhinal cortex and then to the original cortical areas that were active during encoding. This is achieved via back projections, learned associative pathways that reawaken the distributed memory traces. These back projections, just as abundant and structured as the feed-forward ones, must have been associatively modified during learning to know where to point to. Once activated, they reinstate the activity patterns in higher-order cortical areas that reconstruct the remembered experience. This process is thus not a simple playback, but a generative reassembly guided by your current context and state, which is why, each time a memory pattern is reinstated, it can change, even slightly. But careful, this auto-association is fundamentally different from pattern association, despite relying on a similar Hebbian learning rule. In pattern association, for instance, linking a visual cue to a taste, presenting the visual input retrieves the taste, but not the other way around. It is cross-mapping without recursion, linking one input to a distinct output via feed-forward pathways, typically for conditioned responses or top-down control. In contrast, CA3's auto-association can be understood as self-mapping with recursion. The system learns to retrieve a full pattern from within itself, given part of that same pattern. So both input and output are actually the same population of neurons. It iterates until it settles into an attractor state, relying heavily on recurrent dynamics and distributed representations across the whole network to perform completion and denoising. It should likewise be clarified that retrieval doesn't always have to start with a cue. It can of course arise from deliberate recall, when you intentionally try to bring something into mind. It engages your brain's executive control network, rooted in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, in short DLPFC. The DLPFC formulates the retrieval goal and selects internal contextual cues, temporal markers, emotional states, or likely spatial contexts that may serve to locate the memory. It internally formulates search commands that are relayed to the hippocampal system, all while coordinating attention and suppressing interference from irrelevant mental content. The reactivated memory must be evaluated, integrated, and if necessary filtered, a task delegated to the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, in short VMPFC. The VMPFC assesses whether the retrieved memory fits the current question or expectation. Functionally, it acts like a semantic gatekeeper. When a memory fits, semantically, emotionally, and causally, it is routed forward into conscious awareness and decision-making. If not, the VMPFC may suppress the trace or initiate a recursive search by signaling the DLPFC to refine the cues. This top-down control steers the same memory machinery. The hippocampus still completes the pattern, the neocortex still reconstructs the past, but now it's your internal attention, not the external trigger, that starts the process. Now let's try to understand how memories get transferred from temporary to long-term storage. The hippocampus, as powerful as it is, has limited storage capacity. The quantitative limit was estimated as the number of memories that can be stored, depending on two factors: the number of synapses per neuron and the sparseness of the representation. The point is that it's not designed to keep memories forever. Quite the contrary, it's more like a fast learner, rapidly encoding and temporarily holding episodes thanks to mechanisms like long-term potentiation, a burst of activity that reinforces synaptic connections within seconds. Over time, through repeated replay, the hippocampus helps strengthening the connections between cortical areas that were co-active during the experience. This process, known as systems-level consolidation, gradually transfers the memory's weight from hippocampus to neocortical networks, which has vastly more capacity and where encoded information becomes more semantic and generalized. It becomes embedded in pre-existing knowledge networks, independent of the hippocampus and its original episodic context. That's why older memories can often survive damage to the hippocampus, while recent memories cannot. In essence, recollection relies on two key processes. For one, pattern completion in the hippocampus. The CF3 region acts as an auto-association network, reactivating entire memory patterns from partial cues. This enables rapid recall of complex episodes from minimal input. Second, the neocortical reinstatement and consolidation, where the reactivated memories are projected back to the neocortex, reinstating the original activity patterns. Over time, this strengthens the cortical connections, making the memory hippocampus independent. Due to the subtle reconstruction that follows each act of recollection, the past is never static. It is actively reassembled and injected forward into the mental models that in turn automatically influence future states. a future that is conclusively always already present within the past. We remember not to return, but to become.